Ghostly tales, yet mirrors of human life. Hey everyone! Welcome to Encountering Chinese, Ghostly Tales from Zhai. Today, I'm going to tell you a story called Immortal Island. Wang Mian, courtesy name Minzhai, was from Lingshan. He was quick-witted and always topped the exams. However, such talent made him arrogant, and coupled with his knack for making sarcastic remarks, many became targets of his mockery and ridicule. One day, he happened to meet a Taoist. The Taoist carefully examined him and then said in a serious tone, "Young man, your appearance is noble, but because your sharp tongue has caused many troubles, you have accumulated a lot of bad karma, which has diminished your blessings. With your intelligence, if you could change your ways, cultivate virtuous thoughts, and focus on the Tao, perhaps you could become an immortal." Wang Mian, however, scoffed and replied coldly, "Fate is unpredictable, and there's no such thing as immortals." The Taoist was not angered and said, "Such a short-sighted view. Immortals are everywhere, you don't have to search far. I myself am one of them." Wang Mian laughed loudly and mocked, "What a self-proclaimed immortal, truly laughable." The Taoist remained calm and said, "I am but an ordinary mortal, with no supernatural abilities. But if you follow me, you'll soon see dozens of real immortals." Intrigued, Wang Mian asked, "Is that really true? Where do they live?" The Taoist pointed to a spot not far away and said, "Right here, just within reach." Then, he placed his staff between his legs, holding one end out to Wang Mian, signaling him to climb on. The Taoist instructed him to close his eyes and shout, "Up." Wang Mian felt the staff instantly grow thick, like a sack filled with 5 buckets of rice. Suddenly, he felt himself lift off the ground, and unable to resist, he reached out and touched the staff. To his shock, it was covered in scales. Fear immediately gripped him, and he dared not even breathe. After a while, the Taoist shouted, "Stop." The staff returned to its original form. Wang Mian felt a slight sinking sensation as they gently landed. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a magnificent mansion. The estate was filled with grand pavilions and towers, looking like a royal palace. On a high platform, there was a great hall, supported by 11 massive columns, grand and majestic. The Taoist led Wang Mian to the hall and instructed the attendants to prepare a feast for their guests. Before long, dozens of banquet tables were set up inside, resplendent and dazzling. The Taoist changed into an exquisite robe, sat at the top of the hall, and seemed to be waiting for distinguished guests. Before long, the guests arrived one by one from the sky. Some rode dragons, some rode tigers, and others rode phoenixes. Each had a unique mount, some strong and majestic, others light and agile. Each guest held a musical instrument in their hands. There were both men and women among the guests, and even an elderly man with bare feet. The hall was soon filled with an ethereal aura, and faint, beautiful music could be heard. Among the guests, one woman stood out especially. She was stunningly beautiful, dressed in luxurious robes, and rode in on a colorful phoenix, accompanied by several attendants. One of the attendants was holding a musical instrument over 5 feet long. It didn't look like a zither or a guqin, and its exact name was difficult to identify. The banquet began in earnest, with an array of rare delicacies covering the tables. Wang Mian took a bite and was immediately struck by the exquisite taste, far surpassing any mundane food he'd ever encountered. However, his mind was no longer on the feast. His eyes kept glancing at the woman. Her graceful movements captivated him, and his mind was consumed with curiosity. He wondered what kind of sound her instrument would produce and worried whether she could play it well. Just as Wang Mian was lost in thought, an elder stood up and spoke aloud. "Today, we are honored to be summoned here by Master Sui. This is a rare and splendid gathering, and of course, we should enjoy ourselves to the fullest. Those of you with instruments, why not play a piece to liven the mood?" Everyone eagerly agreed, forming groups to play their instruments. Some played strings in harmony, while others blended flutes and pipes. The sound of silk and bamboo instruments filled the air, the melodies soaring into the clouds. However, the woman on the phoenix remained seated alone, seemingly without anyone to accompany her on her unusual instrument. Once the group performance ended, the woman's attendant untied an embroidered pouch and placed the strange instrument on a small table. The woman gently lifted her sleeves, and with delicate fingers, she began to play. The sound was as clear as mountain springs and as gentle as a spring breeze. The music was so beautiful that it brought a sense of calm and joy to everyone in the hall. Everyone held their breath, completely still, not daring to make a sound. When the music finally ended, the last note rang out, clear and pure, like the sound of a chime, lingering in the air. The entire hall burst into applause, and everyone exclaimed, "Truly the skill of Lady Yunhe." After a moment, the immortals rose one by one to bid farewell. Some rode cranes, others rode dragons, and with the sound of cranes calling and dragons roaring, they vanished into the sky in the blink of an eye. After the banquet, the Taoist prepared a bed for Wang Mian, covering it with a luxurious quilt, so that he could rest peacefully. However, Wang Mian couldn't calm his mind. He couldn't forget the woman, and his heart was filled with unspoken affection for her. Ever since hearing her play, his feelings had deepened. The more he thought about it, the more he believed that with his talents, achieving fame and fortune would be as easy as picking up straw, and wealth and beauty would be within his grasp. With these thoughts, his mind became a tangled mess, and he couldn't sleep. The Taoist seemed to understand his thoughts. He sighed and said, "In your past life, you were my classmate, but your resolve in following the path of cultivation was weak, and you eventually fell into the mundane world. Today, I don't treat you as an outsider. I truly want to help you escape from this mire and guide you back to the path of immortality. But you have become too obsessed, and you refuse to understand. If that's the case, I will send you back. We shall never meet again. If you wish to become an immortal, you must face 2 trials." After speaking, the Taoist pointed to a large stone at the bottom of the steps and gestured for Wang Mian to sit on it. He then instructed, "Close your eyes and don't open them during the journey." Wang Mian obediently sat down, and then he heard the sound of the Taoist's whip. The stone, as if alive, lifted Wang Mian into the air. He could hear the wind whistling by his ears as he tightly shut his eyes, unsure of how far he had flown. Suddenly, Wang Mian had an impulse to peek at the view below. He slightly opened his eyes and saw a vast, endless ocean beneath him. The waves crashed against the shore, and the water seemed to go down without end. He was startled and quickly shut his eyes again, but it was already too late. The wind stopped abruptly, and then he and the stone plummeted from the sky. With a loud splash, they sank into the water, sending up a great spray, as though a seagull had dived into the sea. Fortunately, Wang Mian had grown up near the sea and was familiar with swimming. After struggling in the cold water for a while, he suddenly heard applause coming from the shore, followed by laughter. "You fell pretty well," they called out. Just as he was in a sorry state, a small boat rowed over. A young woman aboard the boat pulled him up and said with a smile, "Good news, good news. You're wet, you're set." Wang Mian looked up and saw a young woman, about 16 or 17 years old, with an appearance both graceful and charming. He had just escaped from danger, drenched to the bone and shivering with cold. He hurriedly pleaded, "Could I perhaps warm myself by the fire?" The woman smiled and said, "Come with me to my house. I'll take care of it. But if you're satisfied, don't forget me." Wang Mian, hearing this, quickly made a solemn promise. "What are you saying, my lady? I am a scholar from the Central Plains. Although I find myself in this miserable state today, if I am lucky enough to survive this trial, I will surely repay you. How could I ever forget?" The woman grabbed the oar and rowed the boat with graceful, swift strokes. In no time, they reached the shore. She took out some freshly picked lotus flowers from the boat's hold and led Wang Mian off the boat. They walked for more than half a mile and arrived at a house with a red lacquered door facing south. The woman pushed the door open and entered first. Just as Wang Mian was about to follow, a middle-aged man, looking to be in his 40s, came out to greet them. He cupped his hands in salute and said, "Please come in, young master." He then ordered the servants to bring fresh clothes, shoes, and socks for Wang Mian to change into. After changing into the new clothes, the middle-aged man smiled and asked, "May I ask, young master, what is your esteemed surname?" Wang Mian, feeling a bit smug, said, "I am Wang Mian. I'm sure everyone knows my name. I was personally invited by Master Sui to visit the fairyland. But, you see, I know that fame and fortune are easy to obtain, and for now, I am not interested in hiding away and seeking immortality." The man, hearing this, showed a respectful expression, cupping his hands and saying, "This place is called Immortal Island, far from the noise of the mundane world. My surname is Huan, my given name is Wenrua, and my family has lived here for generations. It is truly a great honor to meet a scholar like you today, a blessing from 3 lifetimes. He then enthusiastically set the table with wine and dishes to entertain Wang Mian. After a few rounds of drinks, Huan Wenrua suddenly said calmly, "My daughter, Fang Yun, is 16 this year and has yet to find a suitable match. I see that you, young master, possess exceptional grace and talent. If you were to marry her, it would be a great blessing for the Huan family. What do you think?" Wang Mian's heart warmed upon hearing this. He immediately thought of the lotus-picking girl who had saved him earlier and guessed it must be her. He quickly stood up, expressing his thanks. To be favored by Miss Fang Yun is indeed a great fortune for me. How could I possibly refuse? Huan Wenrua, overjoyed at his response, immediately instructed his servants to go invite several respected elders from the neighborhood to witness the engagement, and also had someone fetch his daughter. Soon, a fragrant scent filled the air, and a group of over 10 beautiful women emerged, surrounding Fang Yun. They shone brightly, like blooming lotus flowers under the morning sun. After they greeted the guests, they took their seats, with the beautiful women standing beside Fang Yun. Among them was the lotus-picking girl. After a few more drinks, a young girl, about 10 years old, walked out. She was pretty and lively, with a playful smile, her eyes darting around. Huan Wenrua frowned as he looked at her and said, "What is this little girl doing out here? Why isn't she in her room?" He then turned to Wang Mian and said, "This is Lui Yun, my youngest daughter. She's very clever and can recite many classical texts." He then asked Lui Yun to recite a few poems for the guests. Lui Yun nodded, stood up, and began reciting Bamboo Branches, by Lu Yushi, a poem from the Tang dynasty. Her voice was clear and melodious, with a hint of childish innocence. After finishing 3 poems, she sat down next to her older sister, as instructed. Huan Wenrua turned to Wang Mian with a smile and said, "Mr. Wang, you are surely a genius, with many works to your name. Could you share some with us and let us broaden our horizons?" Without hesitation, Wang Mian eagerly agreed and immediately recited a regulated poem. After finishing, he looked around proudly, feeling quite pleased with himself. Among the verses, there were 2 lines that went like this: "With little left but whiskers to show, a humble drink dissolves the woe." An old man from the neighborhood, sitting nearby, softly repeated the lines, seemingly pondering their meaning. Fang Yun leaned in and whispered to him. The first line refers to the Monkey King leaving the fiery clouds cave after being burned by fire, and the second refers to the monk pig crossing the Mother and Son River, after which he became pregnant. Before she could finish, the room erupted in laughter. Huan Wenrua couldn't help but laugh aloud as well, quickly urging Wang Mian to continue his recitation. Seeing the reaction, Wang Mian's heart filled with joy, and he proceeded with another poem, Water Birds, saying, "The puddle goes splish, splash." However, when he reached that line, he suddenly forgot the next verse and fell silent for a moment. Fang Yun quietly whispered something to her younger sister. After hearing it, Lui Yun suddenly smiled and said to her father, Sister just came up with the next line for her husband. The dog's rear makes a loud crash. The entire room burst into laughter, and Wang Mian's face turned a few shades redder, feeling a bit embarrassed. Huan Wenruo shot Fang Yun a glare, and Wang Mian managed to calm himself slightly. Huan Wenruo, still undeterred, continued to ask Wang Mian for more of his works. Wang Mian, feeling pleased, thought to himself that these reclusive people must not know much about the imperial examination essays, so he decided to show off his top-scoring essay. The topic was how virtuous Min Ziqian was. He began. The introduction should be, Confucius praised the great virtue of Min Ziqian. Lui Yun looked at her father for a moment, then said. Confucius wouldn't usually refer to his disciples by name directly. How virtuous Min Ziqian was must have been something someone else said. Wang Mian was immediately stunned, his earlier excitement evaporating in an instant. Huan Wenruo waved his hand with a smile and said, What do you little ones know? The quality of an essay isn't about these details, it lies in the essay itself. With no choice, Wang Mian continued reciting. But every few lines, Fang Yun and Lui Yun would whisper to each other softly, as if commenting on the poem, or pretending not to hear. As Wang Mian became more and more pleased with himself, he even repeated the examiner's comments word for word, saying, each word is full of coherence. Lui Yun, without hesitation, said to her father, Sister says, in should be added to coherence. The people present were all confused. Huan Wenruo didn't dare ask further but felt a bit uneasy, worrying that this comment might be mocking Wang Mian. Wang Mian continued reciting, and then he mentioned another comment from the examiner. When the drum is struck once, all the flowers fall at once. Fang Yun smiled slightly and whispered again to her sister. The two of them couldn't hold back their laughter. Lui Yun turned to her father and said, Sister says that a drum should be struck 4 times. This remark left everyone even more puzzled. Lui Yun hesitated for a moment, and seeing this, Fang Yun smiled and scolded, You little imp, how dare you say that? Wait till I teach you a lesson. Everyone was even more confused, exchanging looks with one another. Unable to hold herself back anymore, Lui Yun blurted out, add in to coherence, and then coherence will become incoherence. If the drum is struck 4 times, wouldn't that make the sound, not? As soon as she finished speaking, the room burst into laughter. Huan Wenruo was suddenly quite angry, glaring at Fang Yun and her sister as he scolded them. To avoid further embarrassment, Wang Mian stood up to offer a toast and apologize to everyone. Initially, he had believed he was exceptionally talented, hardly taking anyone seriously. But by now, he felt disheartened, his face burning with shame. Seeing this, Huan Wenruo quickly comforted him, saying, All right, I have a couplet here. Let everyone try to match it. The first line is, if you remove the G from Wang, it will become Wan. The crowd was still pondering the meaning when Lui Yun, quick on the uptake, responded. If you change I to E in Mian, it will become mean. Fang Yun couldn't hold back her laughter, nearly doubling over in amusement, and quickly slapped Lui Yun a few times. Lui Yun swiftly jumped back and cheekily retorted. "What's it to you? You scold me every day without a problem, but the moment I say something, you can't stand it?" Huan Wenruo watched his two daughters bickering and laughing. Though he felt a bit upset, he didn't know what to do about it. The two sisters laughed as they walked off, and the elderly neighbor also took his leave. The maids led Wang Mian and Fang Yun to the bedroom. The room was exquisitely furnished, with lamps, screens, and a bed, all perfectly arranged. The bookshelf beside the bed was piled high with books, almost overflowing. No matter what literary question Wang Mian asked, Fang Yun was able to answer fluently without hesitation. At that moment, Wang Mian realized how limited his knowledge was, feeling ashamed and helpless, as if he were looking at the vast ocean with nothing but a small boat. Fang Yun called out, "Ming Deng," and the lotus-picking girl entered, revealing her name to Wang Mian. Having been mocked several times, Wang Mian worried that Fang Yun might look down on him. However, despite her sharp words, their relationship remained warm and close, and their bond deepened. From then on, Wang Mian lived a peaceful life, often writing poetry in his free time. One day, Fang Yun said, "I have something to say, but I don't know if you'll want to hear it." Wang Mian asked, "What is it?" Fang Yun smiled and said, "From now on, stop writing poetry. This way, no one will know your poems are so poor." Wang Mian was stunned and, feeling embarrassed, never dared to pick up a pen again. As time went on, Wang Mian grew closer to Ming Deng. He told Fang Yun, "Ming Deng saved my life. You should treat her well." Fang Yun readily agreed. Every time they were in the bedroom fooling around, Fang Yun would always call Ming Deng to join them. Over time, Wang Mian and Ming Deng's relationship deepened, and they often exchanged glances and whispered to each other. Fang Yun noticed this and, several times, scolded Wang Mian about it. Wang Mian would just stammer and try to defend himself. One night, the couple sat together drinking wine. Wang Mian felt the atmosphere was a bit too quiet and suggested calling Ming Deng over, but Fang Yun disagreed. Wang Mian laughed and said, "How can you forget the saying, 'It's better to enjoy with others than alone'? You've read so many books." Fang Yun coldly smiled and replied, "You really don't understand. To enjoy alone is the premise. It should be split like this. One must first seek their own happiness before sharing it with others. If you ask me whether I'd still enjoy it after sharing, the answer is no." After she finished speaking, Fang Yun smiled again, and Wang Mian was left speechless. That day, the Fang Yun sisters went out for a walk, invited by a neighbor, and Wang Mian saw an opportunity to call Ming Deng over. The two of them grew close, without any restraint. That night, Wang Mian felt some pain in his abdomen, followed by swelling in his lower body. He was terrified and quickly told Fang Yun about it. Fang Yun, upon hearing this, laughed and said, This must be the result of you repaying Ming Dong's kindness, right? Wang Mian had no choice but to confess, but Fang Yun coldly smiled and said, "This trouble you brought on yourself, I can't heal it. Since you're not in pain right now, just leave it like this." Days passed, and Wang Mian's condition didn't improve. He was downcast and depressed. Fang Yun, though aware of his troubles, never asked about it, simply watching him quietly. Her eyes were as clear as autumn water, as bright as morning stars. Wang Mian couldn't help but say, "Your gaze really reminds me of what the book says. When the heart is upright, the eyes are clear." Fang Yun chuckled lightly and replied, "With that look of yours, you're more like the saying, when the heart is crooked, the eyes are shifty." She teased him, and Wang Mian couldn't help but laugh at himself. He then pleaded again for her help with his illness. Fang Yun smiled and said, "You never listen to my advice and even suspect that I'm jealous. But you know well that this girl was never someone you should have gotten close to. We were once sincere with each other, and yet you didn't take my words seriously, so I purposely didn't treat you. But since it's like this, I suppose I'll treat you after all." She then reached out, helping Wang Mian remove his clothes. In a soft voice, she muttered, yellow bird, no end in chew." Wang Mian couldn't help but laugh at the strange words, and before he knew it, his condition had miraculously healed. A few months later, Wang Mian, concerned about his elderly parents and young children, couldn't help but feel uneasy. He shared his worries with Fang Yun. She said, "It's not hard for you to return, but we don't know when we will see each other again." Hearing this, Wang Mian couldn't hold back his tears. He pleaded with Fang Yun to return home with him. After a moment's hesitation, Fang Yun finally agreed. Huan Wenrua prepared a farewell banquet to send them off. Lui Yun entered carrying a basket and said, "Sister is going far away, and I have nothing to give you. I'm afraid you'll have no place to stay when you get to Hainan, so I've been building a palace for you day and night. Please don't mind the simple interior." After Fang Yun received the gift with a formal bow, Wang Mian took a closer look. To his surprise, the palace was made entirely of fine grass. The buildings varied in size, with some as big as oranges and others as small as tangerines. There were more than 20 buildings, each with beams and eaves, intricate in structure. Inside each miniature room was a tiny version of home furnishings, with beds so small they were like sesame seeds. At first, Wang Mian thought they were children's toys, but he couldn't help but admire the delicate craftsmanship. Fang Yun smiled at Wang Mian and said, "To be honest, we are earthbound immortals. I am with you because of the bond we shared in a past life. I didn't want to go, but because you miss your father, I couldn't bear to disregard your wishes. After your father passes, I'll return." Wang Mian listened attentively and respectfully agreed. Huan Wenrua asked, "Will you travel by land or by boat?" Wang Mian, worried about the rough seas, preferred to travel by land. The carriage and horses were already waiting outside. Wang Mian thanked Huan Wenrua, and they set off. The carriage sped quickly, and soon they reached the seaside. Wang Mian felt uneasy, concerned that there might be no road. Fang Yun then took out a piece of white silk and tossed it southward. In an instant, a long embankment appeared, about 10 feet wide. As the carriage moved along, the embankment gradually disappeared behind them. They arrived at another place where the tide was surging, and the view stretched endlessly. Fang Yun instructed to stop the carriage and took out the basket of grass-made palaces. With Ming Deng and the maidservants, they quickly set it up. In the blink of an eye, the surroundings transformed into a grand estate. Wang Mian and the others entered the house to rest and unpacked. The furnishings inside the house were identical to those in the grass-made palace. As evening approached, they all decided to rest in the palace. The next day, Wang Mian decided to go home to pick up his parents and children. The carriage made its way straight to the old house, but when they arrived, Wang Mian was shocked to find that the house had already been taken over by someone else. After asking the villagers, he learned that his mother and wife had passed away, and only his elderly father was left. It turned out that Wang Mian's son had become addicted to gambling and had squandered the family's fortune. Left homeless, the grandfather and grandson had no choice but to temporarily stay in the western village. A heavy sense of sadness filled Wang Mian's heart. He had once dreamed of using the imperial examination to secure an official position and restore his family's wealth, but now those dreams were shattered by the harsh reality. He thought to himself, "What good is wealth and status, even if achieved? It's as fleeting and illusory as flowers in a mirror or the moon in water." He hurried to the western village and, when he saw his father, the elderly man was ragged and frail, a pitiful sight. The father and son couldn't hold back their tears upon meeting. Wang Mian asked about his son, only to learn that he was still gambling and had not returned. A feeling of frustration welled up in his chest, and he decided to take his father back to the palace. When Fang Yun saw her father-in-law, she greeted him respectfully and took over the responsibility of caring for him. She prepared warm water for him, bathed him herself, and changed him into fine clothes, so he could rest comfortably in the house. She also invited some older and more experienced people to dine and talk with him. The old man's food, clothing, and daily necessities even surpassed those of most noble families. One day, Wang Mian's son found his way to the palace. Wang Mian had the servants block him at the door, refusing to see him. He only gave him 20 taels of silver and sent a message saying, "Take this money, find a wife, and live a proper life. If you dare come to me again, don't blame me for being rude. The whip will be waiting for you." His son, crying, lowered his head and left angrily. After returning home, Wang Mian seldom socialized with others, but when old friends came by, he always greeted them warmly, his attitude much more humble than usual. One friend in particular, Huang Zijie, had been his classmate years ago. Later, he became a well-known scholar, though his life had been full of misfortune. Wang Mian treated him with great respect, even keeping him in his home for quite a while. The two often talked in private, and Wang Mian even gave him generous gifts. A few years later, Wang Mian's father passed away. Wang Mian spared no expense in selecting a good burial site for him and arranged for a proper funeral according to tradition. By then, Wang Mian's son had married. His daughter-in-law was strict with him, and under her influence, his gambling had greatly decreased. On the day of the funeral, his daughter-in-law saw Wang Mian and Fang Yun for the first time. Fang Yun looked at her, praised her as an excellent daughter-in-law, and gave her 300 taels of silver, telling her to buy some land. Later, Huang Zijie came back to visit Wang Mian, bringing Wang Mian's son with him, hoping to mend their father-son relationship. However, when they arrived, they discovered that Wang Mian and his wife's house had vanished without a trace, and no one knew where they had gone. At the end of the story, the author adds this commentary. Wherever beautiful women appear, people will pursue them, even if it's in hell, let alone when it means becoming an immortal. If earthbound immortals were allowed to marry humans, the imperial capital would probably be empty by now. Wang Mian was a frivolous man, and although he had talent, he never gained an official position, which seemed fitting. Yet, he was able to earn the recognition of the immortals. Does that mean the immortals don't mind his lowly behavior? Perhaps not. But when one sees the sharp tongue of his wife, who is so harsh and unforgiving, it seems that this is a punishment for him after all. The story mentions a figure named Min Ziqian. He was originally a student of Confucius, and lost his mother when he was just 8 years old. His father remarried to a woman named Yao. Unfortunately, this stepmother was extremely harsh toward Min Ziqian, while she doted on her own children, Min Gu and Min Meng. She would beat and scold Min Ziqian, sometimes even denying him food. Despite this, Min Ziqian never complained, quietly enduring the mistreatment. One winter, when the cold was biting, Min's father took his 3 sons on a trip. Min Ziqian was driving the carriage, and his hands were freezing red. He accidentally dropped the whip on the ground. When his father saw this, he was furious, thinking that his eldest son was hopeless. He immediately grabbed the whip and struck Min Ziqian fiercely. To his surprise, when the whip landed, it tore through Min Ziqian's cotton coat, and soft, fluffy reed flowers flew out from it. Min's father was stunned. He quickly stopped the carriage, tore open the cotton coat of his younger son, Min Meng, and saw that it was filled with soft, white cotton. Then, he looked at Min Ziqian's coat and saw that it was filled with low-quality reed flowers. It was clear that this was a result of Yao's favoritism. Min's father felt both ashamed and furious. He hugged Min Ziqian, tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed with guilt toward his son. When they returned home, Min's father could no longer contain his anger. He gave Yao a harsh scolding, then wrote a divorce letter, deciding to send her away. Yao cried and packed her things, preparing to leave. At that moment, Min Ziqian suddenly stepped forward, grabbed Yao, and then kneeled in front of his father, pleading. "If mother stays, only I will suffer from the cold, but if she goes, both my younger brothers will suffer too." Min's father was taken aback. After a moment of silence, he sighed deeply, tore up the divorce letter, and agreed to let Yao stay. Seeing how compassionate Min Ziqian was, Yao was filled with gratitude. From then on, she treated all 3 children equally, no longer showing favoritism. The story also mentions earthbound immortals, a type of mystical being in Chinese Taoism and folk beliefs. These immortals are individuals who have cultivated themselves into immortality, mastering the art of eternal life through their practices. By harmonizing with the natural forces, particularly the earth and the elements of nature, they reach a realm beyond ordinary humans. Unlike heavenly immortals, who reside in the heavens, earthbound immortals are typically believed to have a deep connection with the earth and natural elements, such as mountains, rivers, and the land. These immortals not only possess great powers but are often seen as healers, protectors, and helpers of people. Many earthbound immortals are linked with natural landscapes, such as mountain gods or land gods, and are thought to live among humans, watching over a specific region or natural phenomena. The cultivation of earthbound immortals is closely tied to Taoist alchemy, internal alchemy, and similar practices. The goal of their cultivation is often to merge with the natural energies of heaven and earth, achieving immortality and acquiring extraordinary abilities. The image of earthbound immortals is often associated with simplicity, nature, and the spirit of guardianship. Alright. That's all for today's ghostly tale. Immortal Island. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Please also encourage everyone to comment and share more. We'll see you in the next episode.